All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. And Pete, I'm getting a little bit of echo in my microphone. Oh, it went away. Okay, let's try that again. I'm RJ Eskow, Richard Eskow, and you are listening to the Zero Hour. Once again, it's been an interesting week in Washington, both for what has been discussed in the political world and what has not been discussed. We'll try to hit both those topics in the next 3 hours. I think you'll find it interesting. And in this first hour, we got a couple topics we want to discuss with you. First, we'll be talking with Marianne Williamson, who is an independent candidate for Congress in my home Los Angeles district, formerly Henry Waxman's district. We'll be talking to Marianne, who's a well-known author in the spiritual field, about why she thinks people should support an independent candidate for Congress at this point in time. And interestingly enough, just this week she received an endorsement from Keith Ellison, representative from Minnesota, member of and co-leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So that was an interesting pickup for Marianne Williamson. On the Republican side, we'll be talking with Chris Christie's new shadow, Lee Fang from The Nation, has been doing a lot of great reporting on the Christie administration's cozy relationship with Wall Street, and we'll be chatting with Maya Rockeymoore, who is president and CEO of Global Policy Solutions, about the latest and greatest developments in Washington. So it's going to be a great first hour. Stick with us. And you know, the other big development in the news this week, I think it was important, is about the news. And it has to do with the news that Nate Silver's website, 538.com, has gone online. Now, some of you may know Nate Silver's work. Most of you probably do, because he was extraordinary at predicting who the poll results and election results in 2012, mostly because he's a brilliant guy, great with numbers, knew how to extrapolate from the polls that were out there, weigh them, put them together, and make uncanny predictions. Unfortunately, I think Nate may be overreaching a little bit with his latest venture, and here's why. There's been a lot of controversy since it launched last week over Nate's description of his mission, which he says, the way he puts it is he tells that story I've never fully understood about the fox and the hedgehog. And he says, I guess the hedgehog knows one big thing and the fox knows many things. And Nate says he and his staff, they're going to be foxes. They're going to know many things. They're going to analyze many things just on the data. He calls it data journalism. Now, this to me is a myth. Data journalism is a myth, and here's why. Because nobody can go to the field of journalism without revealing some prejudices or ambitions of their own. The best thing you can do is be honest, open, and, as we used to say in math class, show your work and let the public decide if and how your biases are affecting your work. This is very similar to Ezra Klein's new venture and what Ezra has claimed to do for so long with Wonk Blog and now with his new Vox Media venture. And Ezra calls it explanatory journalism. But whether you call it explanatory journalism or data journalism, there are a couple biases in that I think everybody, especially this audience, ought to understand. Number one, journalism, as it's been practiced for hundreds of years, is data journalism. It's explanatory journalism. That's what journalism does. It digs up the facts, it interprets them, it explains. That's all journalism is ever meant to be. Now, so what Ezra and Nate are really saying is we have a better way of doing that, to which our answer is great. Show us. Nate, in fact, has shown himself to be an extraordinary hedgehog. He's phenomenal at one thing. He showed up the regular media at interpreting the polls in a smart, unbiased way. So whatever his politics are, you can't deny. Nate got it right, the others got it wrong. But Nate has an ideology. Let's not kid ourselves. Ezra has an ideology. They're related, although not identical. It's the ideology of the technocrat. It's the ideology that says the numbers alone can give us the answer. But numbers need to be interpreted. Numbers alone are inert objects on a piece of paper. It's the context you provide, the human context, the historical context, that makes it meaningful. Now, both of those guys have shown strong ideological bias in the past. Nate has already shown it in his first week because he insists on denying the reality of climate change, and he insists on giving prominent space to a writer who's rejected by, and a professor who's rejected by virtually everyone in the climate science field. world. That's not data-driven journalism. That may be driven by his desire to attract attention. It may be driven by his personal ideology about climate change. It may be driven by something else I don't fully understand, but it's not data-driven. It's biased journalism, and unless he's right, he needs to be called out for it. Similarly, Ezra Klein and I went a few rounds because he kept insisting that his explanatory journalism at Wonk Blog was explaining everything you need to know about health reform and the bill that came to be known as Obamacare. But Ezra was omitting 18 studies that refuted his and the president's position about something called the Cadillac tax on high-cost health plans. So we had to go a few rounds on that. If you're explanatory, you got to provide all the facts and let the public decide. Now, it sounds like I'm knocking Ezra and Nate more than I intend to. I'm not knocking them for having opinions. I'm not knocking them for having biases. I'm knocking them for presenting a scam that unfortunately the liberal audience is particularly susceptible to. And that's the scam that says I can sit back in my armchair, just be presented with the facts, and come up with a conclusion that makes me comfortable. But the realities, economic, political, and otherwise, of today's world, including the climate realities that threaten our future, are not ones that can be addressed from an armchair or from a comfort zone. So if your idea of explanatory or data-driven journalism means let's get away from these ideas and these positions that make me uncomfortable, sorry, it's not the right time in history for that. We're going to have to get uncomfortable if we want to make real change. And that's what we'll be talking about in the next hour and in the next 3 hours and in the weeks to come, because I'm Richard Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. We will be right back after this.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune into the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at WEAC Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast D.C.
And I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow. We are back on the Zero Hour, and our guest right now is Marianne Williamson. Marianne is a candidate for Congress in my home district, the Los Angeles district, formerly or currently occupied by Representative Henry Waxman. Now, Marianne is an internationally acclaimed spiritual author and lecturer. 6 of her 10 published books have been New York Times bestsellers, which is a record that many people would envy. She started Project Angel Food. She's been very involved in other charitable and peace activities, and now she is running for Congress as an independent, which seems to make a lot of people uncomfortable. And I'm curious to know why that is, although that, of course, that part's not Marianne's responsibility. But Marianne, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Richard.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And, here's one of the things that strikes me before we get into the substance and the issues and why you're running. So many people seem to have made comments about, the New York Times headline said, new age guru or something like that, seeks spiritual position. Tom DeLay was an exterminator before he ran for Congress, but I'll bet there weren't headlines that said scourge of fleas and bedbugs seeks political position. So why is it you think that your candidacy is making people like the New York Times feel awkward when they write their headlines? Do you have any theories on that?
Well, first of all, thank you for mentioning it. And I also think when Martin Luther King said, we have the opportunity to inject a new dimension of love into the veins of human civilization, I don't think they called him a New Ager. Gandhi talked about love, and Martin Luther King talked about love, and no one seemed to contextualize it as woo-woo. There's a term that's used in the recovery movement where it says contempt prior to investigation. I don't think anybody who has actually read my books or heard me lecture either about metaphysics or about politics, I might not be their cup of tea, but I don't think people walk away thinking, I was wearing saffron robes and, worshiping crystals. So it's difficult to deal with a caricature, except by bringing it to light, and I appreciate you doing it. The conversation around a more enlightened worldview, a more integrative and holistic approach to life, is now baked into the cake, Richard. This is not a fringe conversation. I think it makes you look fringe today if you're not involved in that conversation. I mean, it's already transformed our mainstream impulses towards business, towards health and healing, towards spirituality. So the fact that it's in a way new to politics, that someone is having the radicalism to point out that we are more than economic creatures, I'm hoping that the people of District 33 see through the ruse.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, too, because, of course, at this moment in history, that role for political activism seems new and unfamiliar. But Tom Paine, when he began writing his pamphlets, which I would say was the proto form of blogging, and inspired the American Revolution, was really talking about fundamentally redefining the human relationship to society, to the economy, to the world at large. And this show is based on the belief that if we don't redefine our relationship to the planet, to the future, to each other, it's now become impractical to go on without engaging in that struggle. So we're delighted to have you on and talk about it, but I also don't want to give listeners an inaccurate sense of your campaign, your website, which I believe is marianneforcongress.org, if I remember correctly.
.com, marianneforcongress.com.
Okay, I'm glad. Thank you for that. But you give your detailed positions on a number of issues, including a number of critical issues.
Right.
One of them jumped out at me, and we can get to why in a minute, because not too many candidates for Congress nowadays are strongly staking a position on the immorality and impracticality of drone use.
Yes.
And yet your website is very strong on the issue of drones. So two-part question. One is, what is your position on drones? And two, why do you think there are so few voices in Congress today about drone usage?
Well, the three issues we need to be concerned about, all Americans, is shrinking civil liberties, expanding corporate influence, and domestic surveillance. Now, I don't think the average American seems to realize the technical capability of these drones. They can know who you're sleeping with and what you just logged onto on your computer and what room you just walked into. Now, our government, the same government that was forced to acknowledge the NSA spying because it had to, this government tells us not to worry about this because these drones will only be used by Amazon.com and FedEx and by law enforcement out to get the bad guys. And then if you ask the government, well, what about privacy concerns, we're told that we don't have to worry about that because the drones have to adhere to all local, federal, and state privacy laws. Well, if that doesn't make you guffaw, I don't know what does. But this is all part of a larger picture by which we're losing our democracy, Richard. It's interesting what you were talking about Tom Paine, because it was not just Tom Paine, actually, it was the entire matrix of the founders who were laying claim not only to an extraordinary political vision, but to a philosophical vision. It was a moment in the philosophical evolution of the world, as well as the political evolution of the world, that we repudiated an aristocratic system. We repudiated a system in which power and material resources were to be basically siphoned off into the hands of a very few who took what they wanted, and then just let whatever crumbs fell off the table after they had feasted be, struggled over and competed for by everyone else. Now, we can call it a corporatocracy or plutocracy or oligarchy. I don't care what we call it. But I think we need to awaken to the realization that we have reverted to an aristocratic system. We repudiated an aristocratic system 200 years ago, and it is time to repudiate it again.
Well, I think that's extremely well said. I would also close off the drone discussion by pointing out that one of the most powerful drone systems is called Gorgon Stare, as you know, which is as frightening a name as one can imagine.
Thank you.
Okay, there are going to be people out there saying, I like what Marianne has to say. I love what Marianne has to say. I agree with her, but can she win? What do you say to that?
I can win if everyone who agrees with me votes for me. I mean, we must disenthrall ourselves. The American people are just towing the line with this corporatist direction. And as far as progressives are concerned, progressives have got to break this codependent chokehold that with the Democratic Party. We continue, progressives are looked to by the Democratic, and I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I can't toe this line with the corporatist direction of either major party anymore. Progressives, the Democratic Party comes to progressives every time there's an election and then ignores them until the next one. When are we going to get this? What is going to motivate the Democratic Party to get its soul back if not enough people who say, you lost me, guys? We need some Paul Wellstone. If you stand for the Democratic part of the Democratic Party, that's why, to me, I look to someone like Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is an independent, but he votes more like a Democrat than many Democrats do. And I've said to many people who say what you just said, could you get elected? It is harder for me to get elected, Richard, but I can do more if I win, if I can do more as an independent. Abolition did not come from a major party. Women's suffrage did not come from a major party. Civil rights did not come from a major party. These are people's movements that get enacted by parties secondarily. And we need that now. This chokehold that the two parties have on the system is unhealthy for our democracy. It's sucking all the oxygen out of our public discourse. And we must disenthrall ourselves of the idea that we have to filter all of our political ideas through either party. That's why neither party, including the Democrats, are bringing up drones, are bringing up our mass incarceration rate, which is higher than any country in the world with an African American man having a 1 in 3 lifetime probability of incarceration. Not a major political party, continuing the Democrats, is really talking about the fact that we have 1 in 5 American children living in poverty and food insecure. Not hungry, they use food insecure now because a lot of these obese children are actually malnourished. So sometimes, parties were meant to serve us. We're not meant to serve parties. The parties are not even mentioned in our founding documents, and George Washington, in essence, warned us against them in his farewell address. So if enough people...
I would also add that because, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but because you're running in California, where the rules are a little different, you don't need to be the nominee of a specific party in order to win. Is that correct? Explain how that works a little bit.
Yeah, well, with our open primary, the top 2 vote getters in the June 3rd primary then go to the general election in November. That's an important issue, and thank you for bringing it up, because there's no way I can, quote-unquote, split a vote. People are saying, I don't want to throw away my vote and help elect a Republican. It doesn't work that way. The calculus is such that cannot happen with the open primary. Only 2 people go to the election in November.
Well, and you were able, along the way, to pick up the endorsement this week of Keith Ellison, Representative Keith Ellison, who is, as co-leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, fairly prominent as a Democrat within Congress. Did he tell you he gave a good statement on your behalf? I assume you were pleasantly surprised by that endorsement?
I would say I was very pleased. I wouldn't say surprised. Jennifer Granholm, former governor of Michigan, has also endorsed me. Dennis Kucinich, who is certainly a Democratic representative, endorsed me. Van Jones, who is endorsing me, he's certainly associated with the Democratic Party. I'm not making war here on the Democrats. I'm simply saying, as someone who's been a lifelong Democrat, I feel like Paul Wellstone, Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. And the freeze-out that you are referring to here is part of the problem. You can see right here what's happening here. How will there ever be fundamental change if we are looking to an institution that is so fundamentally tied to the status quo in order to effectuate that change?
Well, on that, we're going to have to leave it, Marianne. But Marianne Williamson, candidate for Congress in the 33rd California District, MarianneForCongress.com. Thanks so much for being with us on the Zero Hour.
Thank you so much for having me. All my best. Bye.
Bye. We'll be right back after this.
You're listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio, produced at the studios of WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam, because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
IRS.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around.
Colon cancer almost always starts with the polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh?
I didn't even see you guys there. I don't know.
Get the test, get the polyp.
I want to talk to my lawyer!
Get the cure.
I got a phone call! CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm RJ Eskow, Richard Eskow, and we are going to go from the left of the left in a good way to the wrong side of the right with Chris Christie. Our next guest, Lee Fang, has been doing terrific reporting in The Nation on, among other things, Chris Christie and what Lee calls Pension Gate. Lee writes that the Christie administration's embrace of exotic investment funds contrasts sharply with his rhetoric as a candidate, and that to critics, the Christie administration's management of the state pension program is characteristic of a governor who seeks to reward his friends while sometimes ruthlessly punishing his opponents. Wow, that sounds like Chris Christie to me. Lee, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So what's the story here? What's going on with this thing you call Pension Gate? I know that Christie ran by dissing John Corzine, who was a Wall Street Democrat, about his handling of pension funds. But what's the story with Christie and the pensions?
Well, Chris Christie says his biggest conservative achievement as governor is changing the New Jersey state pension. You know, he says that the state workers, teachers, firemen, that type of thing, have been destroying the system by creating too much of a liability. So, he increased the retirement age for some workers. He cut benefits. He makes a lot of the workers pay more into the plan. But the flip side of this, and this is what we took a look at, is under the Christie administration, the pension system in New Jersey, one of the largest in the country, has they voted to more than double the allocation of those funds managed by outside alternative investment managers, meaning hedge fund, private equity, real estate. And this is actually a system that Christie, as a candidate in 2009, criticized the former governor, John Corzine, for starting. But when he got into office, his appointees voted to more than double those types of investments, which carry very high fees and are simply more risky.
So he's, among other things, flipping a lot of this money over into funds that cost a lot more to manage. That means that taxpayers are paying more, right?
Well, academic research shows that pension funds and other institutional investors that invest in more conservative strategies, just equities, U.S. Treasury notes, the S&P 500, the simple index fund, right, that carries little to no fees, they typically outperform funds that are weighted more into the alternatives, hedge funds and private equity. So the academic research shows that it's usually a safer bet to go with a more traditional route of investing institutional money. That being said, there are other issues that are involved here. For one thing, some of these hedge fund managers that won these very lucrative contracts, with each of these contracts, which can go between $100 million a year, or $100 million to $530 million. So these are huge contracts. They collect big fees, and some of these folks who won these contracts under Christie donated a lot of money to the outside spending groups that helped elect Christie, helped re-elect him. The Republican Governors Association is now the group that Christie chairs. Some of these hedge fund managers that received these contracts are continuing to give to that, even after Christie became chairman last November. So there's a connection here between Christie's political fortunes and what he's done as governor over the pension fund.
Well, this is beginning to sound a little bit like Bridgegate, because now, as the investigations go on in the George Washington Bridge scandal, we learn that it's starting to get into who got contracts with whom, and David Sampson is head of the Port Authority, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So are we talking now about getting the picture of a governor who's basically using the governor's mansion as a place to hand out patronage and reward his friends?
Well, it's funny you mentioned the mansion. The Huffington Post, Christy Wolke, fantastic reporter there, had a story just 2 or 3 weeks ago showing that the foundation that runs the mansion is now chaired by Christie's wife, and that many business executives that have received tax breaks in New Jersey have been donating to the governor's mansion, basically for the upkeep and how they run the place. So even the mansion has been touched by this type of cronyism, a story that's been ballooning in the last couple of months. The way that Governor Christie has managed the Port Authority, using it as a kind of Tammany Hall to reward his political friends, the allegations about how Governor Christie has used the Hurricane Sandy recovery funds. There's been quite a pattern that's been at least painted in the press that's disrupted the image of Christie that he's enjoyed in the last 4 years.
Right, which is incorruptible, kind of nonpartisan, fair, regular guy who tells it like it is. And by the way, I just can't resist, for no particular reason, bringing up the fact that the governor's mansion is called Drumthwacket. Isn't it? Isn't that the name?
I believe so, yeah. I've never been there, but yeah, that's the name.
I've driven past it. I'll tell you what, it's spectacular, even without all the work that Chris Christie's toadies are doing on this. So, look, I guess at what point do you start to say, look, the guy is pushing the law, there's no evidence, hard and fast evidence of illegality, I guess, at this point. But at what point do you start using the C word for Mr. Christie, meaning corrupt? And at what point do the Republicans have to start looking for another savior?
Well, look, New Jersey's had a lot of corruption scandals in the past. Both Democrats and Republicans got in a lot of trouble for cronyism, for pay-to-play, that type of thing. And, that's the kind of ironic thing about what's going on now, because New Jersey, not too long ago, passed some of the strongest ethics reform laws in the country. So a lot of these stories, like the Huffington Post story on the governor's mansion, my story about the pensions, what Christie did appears to be legal, because although these investment contract managers, these hedge fund managers, can't legally give gifts to Christie, they can't give money to him directly, they've used these super PAC-like groups to move around the law. It's basically a loophole so that they can give him $1 million and, no law is violated. So it's an interesting dynamic, but I know that there are investigations about his conduct and his appointees' conduct at the Port Authority. There's a lot of questions being asked about the legality of He was handing out the Hurricane Sandy money. I think a lot of these questions are yet to be answered.
And listen, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Lee, but I have very carefully looked up the word corruption, and you do not have to be breaking the law to be described as corrupt. I'm just saying, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but what should people be looking for as we read your great reporting and other people's reporting on Christiegate, for instance, everything's gate nowadays? What do you think are going to be the breaking stories, just to wrap this up?
Well, one last kind of quick comment on the corruption angle. A Christie surrogate who's now famous, Bill Baroni, who's now at the Port Authority, but in 2009 he was kind of Chris Christie's attack dog. He said that John Corzine's activity, very similar management of the pension fund, opened the door to the perception of politics, basically saying it was corrupt. So if you use the Christie campaign's own standard, then I suppose it's corrupt.
Well, okay, then here's a guy who is, as they say, being hoist on his own petard and in drum thwacket, no less. Now, how's that for a conclusion? Lee Fang, keep up the great reporting, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Have a nice one.
You bet. You too. Okay, I'm RJ Eskow, and that was the latest on Chris Christie. And, I got to say, I've already written a piece that in the headline described Christie as the heartless, smug, bullying embodiment of the Republican Party, and I stand by those words. Now, does the word corrupt also get to be attached to his name? Well, I'll tell you, it sure doesn't look good, but I'll say this. Who thought that Chris Christie, there were questions about this guy's career from the very beginning, going back to his days as a U.S. attorney. Who thought, and his really suspect prosecution of a Democratic senatorial candidate right before the election, which, by the way, is against the rules that Justice Department gives to its attorneys, because they're supposed to avoid the appearance of political interference. So who decided that Chris Christie was the face of the Republican Party? Which brilliant political pundit thought that he was going to be their savior? Because I'll tell you, whoever he was that decided Chris Christie was the new face of the Republican Party, it's beginning to look more and more like they were right. I'm Richard Eskow, and we'll be right back. This is The Zero Hour.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
Hey Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast D.C.
You know, of all our music clips, I think I like the reggae the best so far, but, you know, we're going to look around and see what else we can find. I've said I might record some myself, too, but who has the time to go into the studio and record music nowadays? Anyway, I'm RJ Eskow. We are back on the Zero Hour, and our current guest is Maya Rockymore. Maya is the president and CEO of Global Policy Solutions. Maya, thanks so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, RJ.
You know what? I just realized that the acronym for your company is GPS. Why didn't I figure that out before?
That's right. We're giving you the direction, the compass of where you need to go in this world and where this world needs to go in terms of inclusion, diversity, equity, and all of the above. So, yes, GPS is what we're all about.
Well, how are we doing? Are we lost? Are we on the way? Are we close?
We're trying to find our way, right? And I'm very excited that the progressive movement seems to be on the upswing when it comes to showing the direction that this nation needs to move in. We've been saying for a long time that we need to be addressing income disparities, wealth disparities in this nation. We've been saying for a long time that gender and race need to be addressed, that we need to be building an inclusive economy. And I feel as if we're turning a corner as a nation, that there are a lot more voices that are listening and beginning to look at how to institutionalize some of these factors that can make us better than we were before and great in the future.
Well, you know, Maya, we've talked a bunch of times, and I know that you're not the kind of person who sugarcoats reality, so I'm always pushing I think at times I've had to push you in an optimistic direction. I'm always pushing optimism, so I'm totally psyched to hear you say that, but also curious to know what are some of the concrete signs you're seeing that the progressive movement is stepping up and really providing some leadership.
Well, it's interesting. I think that the media coverage is getting more traction in terms of, once we influence the media, then you have more people and more people in America who hear your voice, right? So I think the tone in the media has pushed away from this whole notion of austerity. I think that people are beginning to ask serious questions about the neoliberal paradigm. I think that the progressive movement has seen, some minor wins with regards to budgeting. Certainly, the chain CPI win, which was a win of a little minor skirmish in a long battle. And I think that a lot of candidates for office, if you're looking at the mayor of New York City, who is an avowed progressive, I think that the candidates of D.C. are actually aligning on the progressive side. I think that we're starting to see a movement, the Moral Mondays movement that's taking place and is spreading actually from North Carolina to other states across the country. Move on, taking on the red states that are refusing to actually expand Medicaid, and some of these governors who are actually trying to backtrack and accept this Affordable Care Act Medicaid dollars, but trying to call it by another name. I mean, these are signs that are pushing, that are voices that are demanding of an inclusive society and economy are being heard. And so while, yes, you're absolutely right, RJ, you have been pushing me to be less pessimistic. And I feel as if you've gotten me there. I'm a convert. I am on your side that I think that we can do this. But we got
Well, I got to say, having been the preacher of populist optimism, I still worry, and I'll tell you why. Because, yes, I agree with everything you've said. And by the way, I've written de Blasio's victory was a sign of, it's funny. With de Blasio, everybody, all the pundits said, it doesn't mean anything. It's just New York City. But when Michael Bloomberg got elected and had to spend $182 per voter to do it, that was a sign that the country was turning centrist. It's funny how selective they got. But so I wrote, yes, the de Blasio victory, the Elizabeth Warren victory, the pushback, the discussion of populism that people can no longer ignore. All of these things are positive signs. Absolutely. The removal of the chain CPI from President Obama's budget, absolutely a victory for the left. Having said all that, I worry that the national leadership of the Democratic Party is going to try to inoculate us against populism with tepid rhetoric. We heard that the president's and I'm taking the naysayer attitude here for a second. We heard that the president's State of the Union speech was going to proclaim the end of austerity. His budget was going to proclaim the end of austerity. He was going to say that inequality was the defining moral challenge of our time. Instead, he said that opportunity, which can be used by anybody on any side of the political debate, is the defining challenge of our time. What do we do to take good headwinds and get this ship of state sailing in the right direction? That's the part that worries me.
See, well, the Democratic, so this is the issue. The Democratic Party, and I think that progressives are slowly coming to realize this, is actually several parties in one. And unfortunately, the leadership, in many respects, and I am talking about the Obama administration, whom progressives have actually had to fight, literally, on these issues for the last several years. And certainly leadership in the Congress have been not where we would like them to be, right? Right. And so the fact of the matter is that there needs to be a wholesale push to make the Democratic Party what it needs to be on these issues, and that's been happening internally within the party, taking on the White House for, certainly many people believe betraying the fundamental values of the Democratic Party with their positioning around the grand bargain, taking on some of the leadership and the congressional leadership on these issues has been a fundamental part of the progress we've made over the last few years, and we can't deny that. But that has to continue, because what the Democratic Party has actually got into the habit of is talking populism during elections, but then administering once they're in office from the perspective of centrism, and we can't let that stand. The policymaking actually has to follow the electioneering. And so with that, another thing is that I think that we need to really uplift and identify who the strategists are in the Democratic Party, because I think that there's been a failure of strategy, frankly. We have seen that people who try to walk this middle line are out of step with the American people. I think that Democratic candidates who walk this line, particularly on issues of social insurance, time and again find themselves oftentimes either out of office. Look what happened to all the blue dogs. What happened to them? They're not there. Or they find themselves, certainly on the margins. And so, the Democratic Party really has to reclaim their traditional values, and at the heart of that is the legacy and the rich legacy of the New Deal and Great Society. Mm-hmm.
So we're talking with Maya Rockeymoore, who is president of Global Policy Solutions, GPS, and you know how guys hate to ask for directions, by the way. But listen, okay, who are those strategists? Who are the figures in the Democratic Party, or for that matter, in the independent, Bernie Sanders, whomever? Who are those leaders that can move progressive politics in the right direction?
You know what? You've got me stumped there, because I think that they're probably there. They're just not in the right positions. I think that Keith Ellison is somebody that we should look to for leadership in the future. I think that Javier Becerra certainly gets it. I think that I think that Bobby Scott of Virginia. I mean, those three guys in and of themselves. Donna Edwards, Elijah Cummings. I think that there are people who are talented and visionaries within the Democratic Party that serve their role currently in where they are at, but they're not responsible for actually providing overall direction for the party. They're not in positions of power at the DCCC or the DNC or within the congressional leadership. And we certainly need these voices and this type of leadership and strategy at the highest levels.
Well,
of
those are all great folks, and we're going to have you back and talk about how the left can strategize on putting them and people like them into positions of greater power. Until then, we're going to keep the faith, right? Maya Rockeymoore, President and CEO of Global Policy Solutions, thanks so much for being with us.
Always a pleasure, RJ.
You bet. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. We will be back after this.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM, broadcasting live from Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue in D.C.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
The 14,000 International Association of Machinists Workers at American Airlines could be headed for the strike lines after a 30-day cooling-off period unless a labor contract agreement is reached. And if they strike, the 22,000 members of the Transport Workers Union at American say they will support the strike. IAM is tired of its U.S. Airways members making 10% less money than their counterparts at American Airlines. The IAM wants its members to be on the same wage level as TWU workers doing the same work. Now that the airlines are merged into the new American Airlines, the union wants to reach an agreement to increase their members' pay. IAM had been trying for 2 years to reach a deal with U.S. Airways. The union has asked the National Mediation Board for a release from negotiation. That would trigger a 30-day cooling-off period. If no agreement is reached after that, IAM's 14,000 members could go on strike at the merged American Airlines. The bakery union BCTGM has launched a new website called KelloggGreed.com. 220 BCTGM workers continue to be locked out of Kellogg's Memphis, Tennessee cereal plant as the highly profitable company demands concessions aimed at creating a largely part-time casual workforce. BCTGM says Kellogg's plan is to replace steady middle-class full-time jobs in the U.S. with part-time workers with significantly lower wages and substandard benefits. Speaking in a video produced by the BCTGM union, Walter Johnson III describes some of what Kellogg's lockout has done to him.
I was diagnosed with atrial fibrillation. They took me out in the ambulance. The day we got locked out of our job, I lost my company insurance, all medical benefits that day. I couldn't get the heart operation I needed, which meant I could have had a stroke. I mean, it was scary sitting there wondering, am I going to make it? Till I can finally have this surgery. For years, I did right by my company, but they did not do right by me.
The New York, New Jersey Area Port Authority Board of Commissioners has voted unanimously to develop a living wage policy. The policy will also improve benefits. In January, Port Authority Executive Director Patrick Foye told airlines flying in and out of the region's airports to immediately bump wages up $1 an hour and to phase in at least $10.10 an hour for all workers. Workers at LaGuardia and JFK got the increase, but Newark Airport workers didn't. The Port Authority wants to raise standards higher than that going forward. Most of the airport workers fighting for higher wages are represented by SEIU 32BJ. Unite Here represents concessions workers at the airports.
Workers Independent News puts workers and their unions on the national radio news airwaves every day. To help keep labor's voice on the air, go to laborradio.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Over 13 million people are affected by famine, war, and drought in the Horn of Africa. Unfortunately, just listening to this commercial won't help them. Just listening won't give them their next meal, or shelter, or hope. You can help by texting GIVE to 777-444 to donate $10 and by going to usaid.gov/FWD to forward the facts. Brought to you by the Ad Council and USAID. Text donations go directly to Consortium of Humanitarian Relief Organizations. Standard text and data rates apply.
In the ever-escalating competition to be the #1 big-time college football program in the nation, Ohio State University bulked up last fall with a monster recruit named Max. Actually, it's not the coaching staff that signed up this brute, but the OSU Campus Police Department. And the recruit's full name is Max Pro. Not a football player, but a 19-ton armored fighting vehicle built by a Pentagon contractor to withstand, quote, ballistic arms fire, minefields, IEDs, and nuclear, biological, and chemical environments. Wow, college games really have gotten rough. But the campus PD, which received the Max Pro as a gift from the Pentagon, i.e. us taxpayers, says it's not just playing games. Max is available for big actions, like hostage scenarios, killers loose on campus, and extreme flooding of up to 3 feet. Well, have such things been a problem at OSU? No. Would a huge, slow, gas-guzzling vehicle designed for warfare be effective if any of the above were actually to occur? No one in the department wanted to tackle that question. Oh, by the way, operating and maintaining these machines requires specially trained and licensed personnel. Are any of OSU's officers qualified? Again, no answer from headquarters. Also, the vehicles are subject to frequent rollovers, and they lack the ability to go off-road or to maneuver in confined areas. That doesn't sound ideal for a college campus. But the gendarmes say they've adjusted Max to fit their needs. How? By removing the gun turret and repainting the vehicle. This is Jim Hightower saying OSU police finally admitted that Max's chief role would be to provide a police presence on football game days. Great. Police authorities now believe they need a show of military force to keep tailgaters in check.
If you like these feisty pops of populism that Hightower zings out on the airwaves, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter provides the in-depth lowdown on what the greed heads of Wall Street and the boneheads of Washington are doing to us behind the scenes. With Hightower's saucy Texas humor and truth-telling populist perspective, the lowdown literally can lift you up. And get this, you can have the lowdown delivered to your mailbox or email each month for only $15 a year. Yes, 12 issues, only $15. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
On the Zero Hour, I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and in this hour we're going to be talking about some of the developments on the political front and some of the developments on the far future front of transhumanism. We'll be talking with a transhumanist author about his children's book, which argues that death is wrong and should be eliminated. We'll be talking with my friend James Hughes, head of the Institute for Ethics in Emerging Technologies. But before that, we'll be getting at the political realities. And while we're dealing with the political realities, which are so often presented to us by the media, I want to talk a little bit more about the media. In the beginning of the last hour, I spoke about Nate Silver and Ezra Klein and the whole area of so-called explanatory journalism or data journalism and the limitations of that. But then let's talk a little bit about the limitations of so-called liberal television journalism. And particularly, I'm wondering what exactly is going on at MSNBC. Last week, we talked about Abby Huntsman and Abby Huntsman's monologue, which was filled not only with rants and diatribes against Social Security, but misstatements of fact and misinterpretation of data. Now, of all places, MSNBC, which claims to be the progressive or liberal media outlet, should be the place not to allow that to happen. And yet, despite a public outcry, we participated in one, there have been others, they continue to hold the line. They continue to allow those remarks to go unchallenged. And I should say, by the way, that there was a petition saying, among other things, that I should be one of the people allowed to go on and respond to Abby Huntsman. I really couldn't care less about that, honestly. I've been on MSNBC. I still had to feed the cat when I woke up the next day. I still had to take the garbage out. That part doesn't matter to me, so don't misunderstand. It's not about me. I don't care if I'm on or not. But I do think they have an obligation to respond. And there's something else, too. My very good friend Cenk Uygur, who many of you know, a former MSNBC host and now host of the Young Turks on the internet and on YouTube, where he's doing extremely well. He's a great entrepreneur, job creator, my friend Cenk Uygur. He criticized Toure. Now, Toure is a commentator on MSNBC, and Toure asked Senator Elizabeth Warren not to run for president. Why? Because Toure wants to be sure that Hillary Clinton provides the Democratic Party with a quote-unquote pragmatic 2016 candidate and that nothing gets in the way of Hillary's candidacy. Now, here's what Cenk said. Cenk said, and I quote, this is Cenk talking, not me, "This is the same kind of horse crap I've been hearing for the entire time we've been doing this show." He goes, all right, we should run weak-ass Democrats because it's the pragmatic thing to do. And then what do? They get rolled over by Republicans because they're Republican light. Now, I don't know if Hillary Clinton would get rolled over by Republicans in 2016. I think she has a good chance. But I have another concern about Hillary Clinton. I have a very different concern, which is that 80%, according to one poll, 80% of Democrats want her to run, and that's fine. But she enjoys enormous support in the Democratic Party, which frankly puzzles me. Why would a guy like Toure, claiming to represent the progressive movement, say that we should back Hillary Clinton when, as far as we know, she's making noises now that she's going to run to the right of Barack Obama, of all things, on foreign policy, claiming we need to get tougher. She's already suggested we need somebody who can make deals with the Republicans, when exactly what the problem has been for the last 6 years has been Obama's futile attempts to make deals with the Republicans and his desire to drift rightward. So where Hillary Clinton has staked her position at all, it's been on the wrong side of critical issues. It's been on the anti-progressive position, anti-progressive on foreign policy. She's going out and giving speeches for $200,000 a pop to Goldman Sachs, according to some reports. Is that the candidate we want? And as far as those who say we'll give her a chance, well, okay, why? Sure, let's give her a chance by running a progressive candidate against her like Elizabeth Warren, because right now, bear in mind, we don't know where Hillary Clinton stands on the Volcker Rule. We don't know where Hillary Clinton stands on restoring Glass-Steagall. We don't know where Hillary Clinton stands on strengthening Wall Street reform. We don't know where Hillary Clinton stands on strengthening rather than cutting Social Security. We don't know where Hillary stands, period. And yet all of you want to vote for her. Why? Because as Chuck Schumer said, it's Hillary's turn. Hillary Hillary's turn, this is not an inherited position. This is not a position that's handed like a peace pipe from one person sitting in a circle to another. It's a position that's earned through the electoral process. If Hillary Clinton wants to earn the support and respect of progressive voters, let her go out and declare herself to have progressive positions, because, in the words of Pete Townsend, we're not going to get fooled again. We're not going to take a candidate at face value and then find out after the fact that he doesn't represent the things we believe in. So Toure, I have more to say about Toure, but maybe that'll have to wait for another time. Just leave it to be said that you're not a real progressive if you're telling me that Hillary Clinton or any other corporate candidate should run unopposed. That's not an election. It's not a nomination. It's a coronation. And I live in a democracy that I want to be a progressive democracy. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
100% success rate in modifying your home. Free consultation at 10%.
Does this sound familiar? If you're in need of assistance with your mortgage, be careful where you turn for help. Loan modification scammers will offer deals too good to be true. Learn the signs so your life won't be turned upside down. Know it, avoid it, report it. For more information or to report a scam, call 1-888-995-HOPE or visit HUD.gov/prevent-loan-scams.
As a National Guard or Reserve member, you served your country. Now let VA serve you.
I wouldn't be here today as a successful woman without the help that I received.
Your VA honors your service by providing a wide range of veterans benefits. From home loans to job training, VA benefits can help with some of life's toughest challenges.
What's important about VA benefits is they don't just touch you as an individual. They can touch your parents, maybe your grandparents, your child.
Go to benefits.va.gov/guardreserve to learn more, including how to apply online using e-benefits.
I just finished a master's degree recently, and now I'm working on another degree as well. So the military made that all possible. My veterans benefits made that all possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them. VA is ready to help you.
Achieve your next mission. Learn about and apply for your VA benefits today.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the ARC. The ARC is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The ARC is also home to the ARC Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the ARC, so stop by and see them. The ARC, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the ARC's website, www.thearcdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The ARC, part of Southeast D.C. We Act Radio is a very proud partner of the Start at Westminster, a harm reduction, prevention, and awareness initiative sponsored by the Westminster Presbyterian Church right here in D.C. START stands for Syringe, Treatment, Advocacy, Resources, Training. These are the core elements of the harm reduction philosophy at START. The goal of this program is to reduce transmissions of HIV, hepatitis, and other bloodborne infectious diseases by empowering those at risk of infection with the tools, resources, and referrals they need to take charge of their health. Over the past year, the Start at Westminster tested over 1,600 people, and they're averaging about 150 tests each month. And of course, with the proper funding, that number could go even higher. For more information on this terrific program, go to www.startatwestminster.org or visit the Westminster Presbyterian Church, 400 I Street Southwest, right here in Washington, D.C.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm RJ Eskow, Richard Eskow, and our next guest is Katie Gluck. Katie Gluck is a reporter at Politico, a graduate of Northwestern University's Meadow School of Journalism. She's written for the Wall Street Journal, Politics Daily, and a bunch of other good places, Austin American Statesman, Kansas City Star, which is a name of legendary proportions. Katie, thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, well, thanks very much for having me.
Oh, you bet. And listen, you wrote a couple things recently in the last week that caught our eye here, and one of them was about Senator Rand Paul taking his libertarian and right-leaning case, but especially his case for civil liberties, to one of the most liberal enclaves in the country. And as you write, he lived politically to tell the tale. He spoke at UC Berkeley. And could you tell us a little bit about that talk?
Sure. Well, earlier this week, he was, probably among the only Republicans in recent memory who are, pretty clearly eyeing a presidential bid. Who took his message to one of the most traditionally liberal places in the country. Of course, that's Berkeley. And his speech actually went over quite well. He, for the most part, stuck to a very libertarian message, slamming NSA surveillance, slamming the CIA and other members of the intelligence community for the way that they have gone about allegedly collecting data. And that was a message that really resonated with the folks in the audience.
Well, that's interesting because so few politicians in either party, frankly, are hitting this message, which seems to resonate with younger voters and younger people. But Rand Paul went a little further. It sounds like he laid out the prospect for what were his words exactly? A dystopian nightmare. Was that the phrase he used?
Yeah, along those lines. In terms of painting a very bleak picture of the path down which America could be headed, in his view. He was really using some pretty dark language as he described, what he sees as a really sweeping surveillance state. And he says that he's very concerned that, left unchecked, things are going to head down a dark path. So, that was really central to his speech. He's given this message in a number of different ways in a number of different venues, but this venue is particularly interesting because, as much as it was a libertarian message, he is certainly a Republican senator from a red state, going to one of the bluest states in the country and one of the bluest enclaves in one of the bluest states in the country. And, so it's just, very interesting that he would choose to go there and bring that message with him.
Oh, for sure. And what's he doing? I know you point at what's his game plan here. You think, I know you say that, first of all, I liked, just personally, editorially, I loved a lot of what he had to say about this, although I despise his economic agenda, but that's just me. I'm speaking as an editorialist, not as a reporter. But as a reporter, he said, he was asked, according to your piece, there's been pretty extensive, this is a question, there's been pretty extensive media coverage of your recent visits to places that don't usually vote Republican, like students at Howard University. And he said, you mean like Berkeley? And people laughed and applauded. Mm-hmm. What do you think? Has he talked at all about what his strategy is for in going to these atypical enclaves for a Republican? What do you think he's up to?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to actually chat with him a few times about this, and he really sees an opportunity for a new kind of Republican, as he puts it, to broaden the Republican base. He sees a number of issues that he thinks if the Republican Party would just adopt and champion, it might make the national brand more appealing to a broader range of people, sort of beyond, the demographics that have more recently kind of typically supported the party. So, he points to things like indefinite detention, opposing that as a way to sort of reach out and embrace, people who come from backgrounds. His examples are, whether you're Jewish or Asian or African American, if you can relate to, times of trouble historically, for your people, then perhaps this is something else you'd also be opposed to. That's kind of, one thing that he proposes. He talks a lot about privacy as being a good way to appeal to more young people. He says that, young people aren't necessarily following, I'm paraphrasing here, but, the gist of his argument is that young people aren't necessarily following all the nitty-gritty details of, every, tax loophole debate, but, they do feel strongly about their cell phones and something with which they're familiar. And so that's another way that he's really tried to drive home his message in a personal way.
Well, leaving aside the issue of whether he's right about, young people's interests or whatever, he's clearly seeking to find common ground on these issues. But has he talked at all about his father's experience? Because his father, Ron Paul, of course, was a candidate for president a couple times, ran for the Republican nomination, and seemed to get how shall I put this, on the wrong side of the Republican establishment on national security issues, among other things. Has he talked about how he thinks he can avoid falling into the same trap?
That is an issue, that I've asked him about. Many other reporters have asked him about it, and it doesn't appear to be a subject into which he has so far waded too deeply, aside from, his camp sort of stressing that, while he certainly respects his father, he's also very much his own person, which is, something you hear from a lot of politicians who have relatives who are also kind of in the family business. Everyone from Jimmy Carter's grandson who's running for governor in Georgia, over to Rand Paul. So that's something you hear a lot from people who are kind of the offspring of well-known other kind of political types. But it's a good point that you raised, because he's going to be walking a number of tightropes should he decide to run for president in 2016. And one of those is certainly going to be the question of, how can he ensure that he maintains that level of excitement among young people, or some corners of young voter blocks, and among others who are more libertarian or excited about him or excited about his dad, while at the same time being perceived as an acceptable, viable option to the Republican establishment.
All right. Well, now, Katie, I'm going to ask you a question that I'll just tell you in advance. You could say, hey, look, I'm a working reporter. I'm not going to answer that question. But I'll throw it at you anyway, and you can decide. Okay. Now, I've dealt with and interviewed people that I strongly disagree with, people that I agree with. Sometimes I like the ones I disagree with, don't like the ones I agree with, whatever. So question number one, do you like Rand Paul?
That's a funny question.
Sure
I have been fortunate enough to get to speak with him a number of times, and grateful for that opportunity. And we've always had interesting conversations, and that has unfolded. Nice answer. Okay. You think he's intelligent? He is a candidate that, he's a lawmaker and a potential candidate who he himself has said, the odds are about 50-50 that he may run for president. But either way, clearly in the national eye, clearly there's a lot of buzz about him, and he's getting attention in circles that have traditionally not been receptive at all to Republicans. And he, as you noted, is going to some of these communities where, that may not have seen too many Republican lawmakers in quite a while. And so I think he is emerging as certainly a very interesting lawmaker to keep an eye on as we get closer and closer. And, it's already 2014, so we are not too far away from the presidential cycle heating up. And so definitely a fascinating one to keep your eye on. Deftly handled, may I say. And I apologize. I just couldn't resist asking. I was just curious. Really, you know how that is. We ask for a living. Sure. Now let me switch to a different topic for a second. You also wrote that the Department of can we talk about Ted Cruz for a second? Sure.
Because I'll tell you, and I'll try to make it up to you slightly, get you for what I just did to you by saying,
okay.
I like Rand Paul a lot better than I like this guy, okay? Ted Cruz, and that's me. That's not you. You got to work with these guys. The Department of Justice has denied, this is you writing, the Department of Justice has denied Senator Ted Cruz's request for a special prosecutor to probe allegations that the IRS targeted conservative groups. Really? So does Ted Cruz have anything else to offer in his campaign? Do you cover Ted Cruz regularly? Because at least I'll say this for Rand Paul. He's trying something different. He's reaching out to new audiences. I loved his stand against drones. Again, this is me editorializing. You're a journalist. But love his stand on national security and civil liberties, whatever I think of the rest of him. What is Ted Cruz, if he's running, what is the theme of his campaign going to be, do you think?
That's a good question. He is also very much a lawmaker and a potential candidate to keep close tabs on because in some parts of the country, I mean, he is, especially in his home state of Texas, which is home to a massive and very conservative Tea Party network. He's their guy, and he as much as perhaps in Washington, he's a bit more controversial depending on whom you ask. He is certainly one of the favorites among the grassroots, and will be another force to keep an eye on as we get closer to 2016.
Okay, well, I'm not going to ask you my terrible questions that I asked you about Rand Paul, but I will say there's been some talk that he doesn't get along well with his colleagues, that there's some friction there within the Republican community. Is that true? Is there some, has he, for example, I saw an interview with Senator Tom Coburn, who's retiring, who, there's some suggestion that there's friction with his fellow colleagues on the right. Is that true?
Well, you can certainly point to a number of instances and legislative debates where he's really kind of been on one side of an issue, and then kind of the bulk of his colleagues have been on the other side of an issue. And sometimes these are more controversial issues tied to taking, perhaps leading to taking tough votes that some seem might have otherwise been avoided. Right. It's very interesting. But of course, everyone up here will say, that everyone has a cordial relationship with everyone else. So
my good friend, the senator from, absolutely. So only one last very quick question for you, Katie Gluck. Will you ever come back on the 0 hour after those questions I asked you?
Well, I would love to, and I sure appreciate you having me.
You bet, and thanks for all the great reporting. That was Katie Gluck from Politico. Thanks for being with us, Katie, and we will be back after this with a look at the future. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is the 0 Hour.
You're listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio, produced at the studios of WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around. Stick it in the devil.
Colon cancer almost always starts with the polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh?
I didn't even see you guys there.
Get the test, get the polyp,
I want to talk to my lawyer!
get the cure.
I got a phone call!
CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and our next guest has written a rather unexpected book, or at least few of us expected it. Gennady Stolyarov II is a transhumanist philosopher and the author of a children's book entitled Death is Wrong. He's also an actuary, science fiction novelist, philosophical essayist, poet, amateur mathematician, and composer. He's also worked a lot in the insurance field, as did I in a previous life, so we have that in common. Gennady, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Richard. I am very pleased to be able to talk to you today.
Did I pronounce your name correctly, first of all?
It's Gennady for American audiences. For Russian audiences, it's Gennady.
So I was closer to the Russian, but I'll call you Gennady, so everybody's comfortable here. So listen, you have written a book that's gotten a lot of attention, both positive and negative, and I wanted to talk to you about it, explore the ideas in it. First of all, tell us a little bit about Death is Wrong.
Sure. Death is Wrong is an illustrated children's book on the feasibility and desirability of indefinite human lifespans that don't have a fixed upper limit. The book is aimed largely for children ages 8 and up. I think some precocious younger children would also find the book to be very interesting and beneficial and motivating. It's also a good primer on indefinite life extension and the recent scientific advances with regard to it for teenagers and adults who are seeking a concise introduction to the ideas.
Now, a lot of people will say their first reaction will be that this idea of indefinite life extension, which means that barring any sort of drastic, that we would achieve some sort of scientific state of knowledge where barring any accident or event from the outside, people could live indefinitely long lifespans. Many people will say this is a very fringe idea, and yet Google, among other organizations, perhaps Google's the most conspicuous, has invested in it and given its backing to it. I would say, you're free to disagree, probably the standard scientific and medical community has not embraced it as a practical idea at this point, but it's certainly being explored. And why is this a good thing? Why is this something that children or anybody else should aspire to?
It's a good thing because life is good, and the life of every single individual who hasn't committed extraordinary amounts of harm is precious. It's a whole internal universe of thoughts, sensations, feelings, aspirations, memories, and to have it all be snuffed out, to have all of that be irreplaceably gone, not just to others, but also to oneself from the standpoint of one's own experience, to me, is a great moral travesty. Historically, of course, our technological means to combat it have been very limited, but that may change within the next several decades. You mentioned Google's Calico initiative, which is very encouraging. Craig Venter has started a new company called Human Longevity, which is also going to be making forays into that field. And then we have Dr. Aubrey de Grey and his 7-pronged SENS, Strategies for Engineered Negligible Senescence, which essentially have identified the 7 types of damage that essentially constitute bodily deterioration and senescence. If we can reverse each one of these through periodic treatments, then we're good to go for an indefinite lifespan. And that's a good thing because we preserve all of this richness that each individual has to offer to the world.
Well, but now let me give at least part of a counter argument. One is that even a radical extension of lifespan, should that become possible, and there will be objections. You've heard them all about population and doing this in an economically just way. But without even going into those for a moment, at least. Extending the lifespan is not the same as eliminating death. So one of the criticisms that your book has gotten, for example, is Slate wrote that representing death as wrong gives it greater power, especially when people do die. I mean, I think even in an indefinite lifespan scenario, people will die, right? I mean, even if we were able to eliminate the natural causes of death, there would be accidents. There tragically might be wars or terrorism or meteor strikes or whatever. So is it right to tell children that death itself is wrong and should be eliminated?
I would say that while reversing senescence is not in itself a panacea for all death, I do think it will alter the way people treat other perils in terms of their risk aversion, to use a concept that's commonly utilized in the insurance world. So if a person has more to lose, if a person has, say, 500 potential years of life to lose from an accident or from an act of crime, that person is going to be a lot more careful and a lot more interested in averting that peril. For instance, I think indefinitely long-lived individuals will be a lot more interested in riding in autonomous vehicles, where the possibility of human error causing an accident is greatly reduced, if not eliminated. I think they'll also have a longer time horizon. They'll want to avert larger scale crises and disasters that could make life very unpleasant and short otherwise, such as wars, pollution, even longer-term natural disasters, ice ages, for instance, or a meteor strike. I think people who have hundreds of years to look forward to or thousands of years to look forward to potentially are going to be a lot more attentive to these kinds of risks. And that means through the progress of science and technology, we'll have a better world in those respects as well.
Last question then. Why kids? Why a kids book? Why not just write an adult book making these arguments, making this case? What made you decide to gear this rather unusual argument by most standards towards young people?
It's because young people are today really only exposed to rationalizations for death, either religious or secular. When they first encounter the existence of death, they're met with consolations or excuses. They're told that death is natural, or you go to heaven after you die, so you really live on, or it's not going to come for a long time for most kids, so put it out of your mind. And I wanted to introduce them to a different perspective. It's surely not the only perspective they'll be exposed to, but I want them to consider that it may be possible to defeat the primary cause of death within existing human lifespans. And if so, that's a really worthwhile effort. I want these kids to go into fields where they could make a difference. I hope this book inspires a lot of kids to become scientists, engineers, medical doctors, or philosophers and activists, however they're inclined, so that they can make a difference. And at the same time, they could improve their lives and contribute to the world in a really good way.
Well, you've given us something to think about. Gennady Stoliarov II, author of Death is Wrong, a children's book on indefinite life extension. Thanks so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure, Richard. I appreciate you having me on this program.
You bet. And that's it. We will be back with James Hughes, who is the director of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, right after this message. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
Hey Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune into the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast DC.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and we've just gotten done talking with Gennady Stoliarov, who has written a children's book called Death is Wrong, but on the broader issues of technological change and what they mean for our future. As you know, we deal with that here on the Zero Hour. We talk not only about the issues of the day, although those are important, but about the long-term human future and what we might be doing about it now. And in that line, our next guest is an important thinker in this area. James Hughes is the executive director of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, where I am or was an affiliated scholar. I haven't checked lately. He's a bioethicist, sociologist at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, where he teaches health policy, one of my former full-time professional areas, and serves as director of institutional research and planning. He's member of all sorts of groups, all sorts of interesting efforts. He is author of Citizen Cyborg, Why Democratic Societies Must Respond to the Redesigned Human of the Future, and is working on a second book tentatively titled Cyborg Buddha. James Hughes is known as Jay to his friends, and he is my friend. So Jay, how are you?
Very good, RJ.
It's great to talk to you. It's been quite a while. And I guess before we start, I should let our audience know that you have described yourself as, among other things, a techno-progressive. Am I using the terminology correctly?
That's right.
And what is a techno-progressive?
Techno-progressive is someone who takes seriously that there are going to be a number of policy issues coming onto our plate in the imminent future as a result of accelerating technological change and the convergence of technologies. A lot of those issues aren't taken seriously yet by a lot of people in public policy. They are dismissed as science fiction. And we also distinguish ourselves from folks in futurism who kind of hand wave at these problems or adopt a libertarian approach, pretend that the market will fix everything or that magic nano dust from heaven will fix everything. And so we want to position ourselves as folks who take seriously these emerging technological issues, but want to address serious public policy to them.
Now, I don't know if you describe yourself as a transhumanist, and for those listeners who don't know the term, transhumanism basically, well, you can probably summarize it better than I. Do you consider yourself a transhumanist, and what is a transhumanist?
I do. A transhumanist is someone who believes that it's both morally acceptable and technically feasible to use technology to transcend the limitations of the human body and brain. So things like radical life extension, cognitive enhancement, genetic engineering, those kinds of technologies, that those can be morally defensible for individuals to apply to themselves. I am a transhumanist, but another way to define a techno-progressive is kind of a left transhumanist, someone who sees all the ways that those things could go wrong if we don't adopt the right kind of policies.
So here's, by the way, I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but I think the last time I saw you was years ago at an IEET seminar where I spoke. A number of us spoke, and at dinner that evening, I was asked, "Are you a transhumanist?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Then you are not a transhumanist. You're a non-transhumanist." And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, what will you do in the future?" And I said, "The next indicated right action." And my point being, I guess, that aren't these terms sometimes divisive? For example, I might not identify, and in fact don't identify, as a transhumanist, but if a new technology came along, I tried Google Glass for the first time last month, thought it was pretty cool. If a new technology comes along that enables me to merge with or more easily communicate with the internet, or I need an artificial limb that's neurologically controlled, I'll be all for it. So just as I'm all for having a cup of coffee in the morning to jumpstart my brain so that I can start writing. So I guess my point is it really, I mean, clearly you've made the decision that to identify as a transhumanist is one way to advocate for progressive and just applications of new technologies, but isn't there an argument that might be made that just by advocating for them as they arise, that's another way to achieve the same goal?
Well, I understand the argument, and it's an old one in our progressive circles as well. I mean, I cut my teeth as a young activist as a socialist, and the question was always, well, why call yourself a socialist? Why not call yourself a progressive or an economic democrat or something? And then one of the reasons why we adopt ideological terms is because ideology has a real semi-permanent existence in the world. If one were to say, well, I'm not a socialist, but I'm for, significant redistribution of wealth and for union rights and for national health insurance and so on and so forth, people are going to say, yeah, but you're really a socialist. Similarly, if I say I'm not a transhumanist, but I'm for people's right to take cognitive-enhancing drugs, I'm for their right to use cloning once it's safe and effective, I'm for their right to do genetic engineering to make themselves super strong, people are going to say, okay, you don't say you're a transhumanist, but you really are a transhumanist. So I just go with it. It's a reality that I'm on the transhumanist end of the spectrum.
Well, okay, fair enough. And among other things, you in a past life were a Buddhist monk, right?
Right.
And so, in a sense, transhumanism is the transformation of the self that doesn't exist.
Well, my approach to the relationship of Buddhism and transhumanism is kind of summed up by Niebuhr's Serenity Prayer, which is that we should have the courage to change the things that we can, and the serenity to accept the things that we can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. And there are a lot of things about the human condition that we are increasingly capable of changing. We need the Buddhism to still live a serene life and not be overly acquisitive about the things that we will never be able to change. But Buddhism doesn't counsel that you stand there in the middle of the road while a truck runs you over. It says you can get out of the way. So similarly, yes, there is no self, but that doesn't mean that you don't get out of the way of the truck.
Right. The courage to change the things we can, the serenity to accept the things we can't, and the willingness to augment ourselves so that we can change more of the things we can't. That might be another way to look. But now, interesting that you mentioned, for example, the use of cognitive enhancing drugs, because that makes a good segue to one of the issues I wanted to talk to you about. We're talking with James Hughes, the director of the Institute for Ethics in Emerging Technology. I never get IEET.org, and you wrote a two-part piece about cognitive enhancing drugs with the provocative title in part one, "Are we obligated to make ourselves more moral and intelligent?" Meaning, in other words, as I read it, reversing the argument from do we have the right to take these drugs and augment our cognitive capabilities with them, do we have a moral obligation to take them? Is that a fair summary of the question you were posing?
That's right. I mean, I'm writing this book, as you mentioned, Cyborg Buddha, and one of the things that it's led me to is a deeper engagement with both Western and Eastern virtue theory. And the virtue theory, instead of the Enlightenment notion of the liberal individual, we should leave each other alone and have rights to our autonomy, a lot of people make arguments for stimulant drugs, cognitive enhancement drugs on those grounds. They say, look, if it's not hurting anybody else, people should have a right to take them. But I've been increasingly interested in how you articulate an argument for a good version of character, how people can live a flourishing, full life, which doesn't just say, well, if you want to take heroin, you can go lie in the gutter and take heroin, but say, no, that's not a good version of a full life. We want to encourage each other to this richer form of life. And that means that there has to be some element of character development and virtue. And so the argument, I think, can be a lot stronger on behalf of stimulant drugs and cognitive enhancement drugs in general, which is to say that they are generally used both for the treatment of ADD and by students who use them off-label for academic purposes in the service of various virtues. And they contribute in their use in society to the exercise of virtues. And so I think that's a much stronger case than just saying let people do it.
Well, it's a fascinating argument, which unfortunately we're going to run out of time to explore. The last time we spoke, I think it was for about an hour. We don't have that kind of time now, but I hope you'll come back because it's fascinating, including the question of, well, who decides? Who decides what is moral? Who decides what is a favorable use of technology? So clearly it's a conversation that we'll consider. We'll have to continue going forward. James J. Hughes, Director of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, Professor of Public Health Policy and Philosophy and all sorts of other interesting things. Jay, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure, anytime.
You bet. And I'm RJ Eskow, and we will be right back. Don't forget, whether it's today or thinking about the issues of the day or thinking about the next 500 years of human history, this is the Zero Hour. I'm RJ Eskow, and we'll be back after this.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Western state Republicans engaged in legal battles about same-sex marriage. Do you know which side they're on? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Soon, the federal 10th Circuit Court of Appeals will hear arguments in the same-sex marriage cases, appeals brought by Utah and Oklahoma that seek to reverse the federal district court decisions that struck down those states' bans on same-sex marriage. In those cases, conservative Republican lawmakers, including former Wyoming Senator Alan Simpson and former Kansas Senator Nancy Kassenbaum, have signed on to an amicus curiae, a friend of the court brief. That brief urges the court to, as the federal district courts did, strike down the gay marriage bans that they say contravenes the constitutional guarantees of equal protection and liberty. Ideologically, this position perhaps is not all that surprising, for Western state Republicans espouse liberty and freedom and personal choice and decry government interference in our lives. And politically, this position is not an outlier either. Nationwide, 40% of Republicans say that same-sex marriage should be legal, an increase from 33% last May and 24% in September 2012. Homophobes may significantly still control much of the Republican Party, but as this amicus brief shows, they no longer speak for a lot of it. And that's a victory for people of all political stripes and persuasions. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
Packers.
Vikings.
We come from different places.
Uptown. Downtown.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full. But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live united.
So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The 14,000 International Association of Machinists Workers at American Airlines could be headed for the strike lines after a 30-day cooling-off period unless a labor contract agreement is reached. And if they strike, the 22,000 members of the Transport Workers Union at American say they will support the strike. IAM is tired of its U.S. Airways members making 10% less money than their counterparts at American Airlines. The IAM wants its members to be on the same wage level as TWU workers doing the same work. Now that the airlines are merged into the new American Airlines, the union wants to reach an agreement to increase their members' pay. IAM had been trying for 2 years to reach a deal with U.S. Airways. The union has asked the National Mediation Board for a release from negotiation. That would trigger a 30-day cooling-off period. If no agreement is reached after that, IAM's 14,000 members could go on strike at the merged American Airlines. The bakery union BCTGM has launched a new website called KelloggGreed.com. 220 BCTGM workers continue to be locked out of Kellogg's Memphis, Tennessee cereal plant as the highly profitable company demands concessions aimed at creating a largely part-time casual workforce. BCTGM says Kellogg's plan is to replace steady middle-class full-time jobs in the U.S. with part-time workers with significantly lower wages and substandard benefits. Speaking in a video produced by the BCTGM union, Walter Johnson III describes some of what Kellogg's lockout has done to him.
I was diagnosed with atrial fibrillation. They took me out in the ambulance. The day we got locked out of our job, I lost my company insurance, all medical benefits that day. I couldn't get the heart operation I needed, which meant I could have had a stroke. I mean, it was scary sitting there wondering, am I going to make it? Till I can finally have this surgery. For years, I did right by my company, but they did not do right by me.
The New York-New Jersey Area Port Authority Board of Commissioners has voted unanimously to develop a living wage policy. The policy will also improve benefits. In January, Port Authority Executive Director Patrick Foye told airlines flying in and out of the region's airports to immediately bump wages up $1 an hour and to phase in at least $10.10 an hour for all workers. Workers at LaGuardia and JFK got the increase, but Newark Airport workers didn't. The Port Authority wants to raise standards higher than that going forward. Most of the airport workers fighting for higher wages are represented by SEIU 32BJ. Unite Here represents concessions workers at the airports.
Workers Independent News puts workers and their unions on the national radio news airwaves every day. To help keep labor's voice on the air, go to laborradio.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Kerr. This week, a Kansas federal judge ruled that it was unlawful for the federal government to deny states' ability to enact state-specific voter registration requirements. The Washington Post reported that now, quote, both states require new voters to provide birth certificates, passports, or other documentation to prove their U.S. citizenship to election officials. Breitbart in the Washington Times portrayed the ruling as a big win for election integrity. Radio host Laura Ingraham also defended the ruling and hyped accounts of voter fraud on her show.
I see this as a big victory after a lot of struggles for states to
maintain the integrity of the voting process. No, the left wants like a gym membership, a permission slip from your first grade teacher. I mean, they'd take anything to vote at that point.
But these voting laws have historically denied thousands of people access to the ballots. The Advancement Project notes that proof of citizenship laws, quote, impose significant time and financial burdens and disproportionately affects minority groups such as Latino citizens and newly naturalized citizens. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
I'm Richard Eskow. Oh, getting a little feedback in the headphones there. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and we are back on the Zero Hour. And in this hour, we are going to be talking about the Silver Revolution. We are going to be talking about whether or not old people need to, should, and can organize for constructive social change. We're going to talk about what's going on in Google and the Silicon Valley, and we're going to talk about the Silicon Valley's cyborg candidate for Congress. But before we talk about any of those things, I want to say a few words about free higher education. Now, in this country, as most people know, student debt has become a crisis of epic proportions for the young. There's now more student debt in this country than there is credit card debt. It's now a total of about $1.2 trillion is owed. And I did the math myself. We are now seeing that rate increase by about $100 billion each year. $100 billion more student debt with every year that passes by. This is a crisis. This is a moral crisis. This is a political crisis. This is an economic crisis. And in the end, it's a crisis about justice. I just want to make a few points, if I may, about this issue. Social mobility in the United States is at or near its lowest point in modern history. In fact, I think it is at its lowest point. We pride ourselves at being the only in America nation. Only in America can a poor boy grow up or poor girl grow up to be president of the United States. No more, because education is the door to social mobility. We've lost social mobility. We've lost access to education. It's in danger of becoming an inherited privilege in this country, just as it would be with an aristocracy. The greatest predictor of a child's likelihood of graduating college lies in answer to this question: did his parents graduate high school or college? Right now, the statistic is that a young person in the United States, the odds that he will achieve higher education if his parents do not have an upper secondary education are just 29%, one of the lowest levels among developed countries. That's according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. One of the lowest levels of this kind of advancement in the world is here in the United States. This is not a land of opportunity that's being described here, and that's a shame. The cost of higher education is hitting lower-income Americans the hardest. A recent analysis showed, and I quote from the Hechinger report, America's colleges and universities are quietly shifting the burden of their big tuition increases onto low-income students, while many higher-income families are seeing their college costs rise more slowly or even fall. In other words, even grants and scholarships are skewing towards the wealthier among us. And more people are failing to graduate college. Young Americans in the 25 to 34-year-old age group aren't as educated as the young citizens of many other developed countries. In fact, the OECD found that the U.S. ranks 14th in the world, 14th, 13 countries ahead of us in the percentage in that age group with a higher education. That's a personal loss for our young people, but it's also an economic loss because better educated adults earn more, a lot more. In fact, college educated, it's unfortunately split by gender, as men are still earning more than women. We're working on that. But right now, college educated men in the United States earn an average of $675,000 more over their lifetime than those without a college education, and it's a little under $400,000 for women. We'll work on that. We'll improve that. But in the meantime, we need to get more people educated. Unfortunately, higher education in the United States is extremely expensive, and public funds pay for far less of our education than elsewhere in this country. So this country, compared to other developed countries, charges more for education and provides less assistance for it. In fact, public funds pay for 70% of higher education on average in developed countries and pay for roughly half of that here. So, with that in mind, we need to remember that not only are things not getting better, they're getting worse. States are withdrawing their higher education funds, even though higher education is a good investment. It's an affordable dream. It's something we can do for our country. How would free public higher education work? One way would be to make tuition to all public universities and colleges free. We can do that. We can afford that. It's cheaper than the defense budget, for example. It's something we can organize and put together. It's significantly cheaper, as a matter of fact. It could be paid for in any number of ways. Closing corporate loopholes would come to nearly double the cost it would take to provide free public higher education. Or Representative Jan Schakowsky's Fairness in Taxation Act, which would up the top tax rate for billionaires to a very modest 49%, would also pay for it. So the numbers are with us, the morality is with us. It would be good for the economy, and it would be a way of freeing our young people from this crushing burden of debt and allowing them to lead healthy, productive, meaningful, fulfilling lives. So, although it sounds radical to today, every new idea sounds radical. I hope others will join in the call for free, universal public higher education. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, and even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 AM We Act Radio.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast DC.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. And with us is Eric Kingson, who is co-director and co-founder of Social Security Works. And the question of the day is, could there be a silver revolution coming among America's seniors? The New York Times quoted Eric in a recent piece about that topic, saying that for whatever the reasons, several social scientists say deteriorating conditions for retirees and older Americans in general, including fears about retirement security, age discrimination, increasing poverty among the elderly, and new threats to cut programs for seniors, could be the impetus for what some are calling a silver revolution. Eric Kingson is professor of social work at Syracuse University's School of Social Work and has a number of other academic appointments as well. He's written a number of books on the topic, and he is primary author of Ties That Bind, The Interdependence of Generations, which is a beautiful and important book. He is primary author of Social Security and Medicare, a policy primer, and the diversity of the baby boom as well. He's also authored more personal books well worth reading, including Lessons from Joan, Living and Loving with Cancer, A Husband's Story, and In Their Own Voices, which presents the experiences and advice of 14 children and youth facing life-threatening illness. Eric, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, Richard, love to be on with you.
Well, it's always great to have you. And this is a topic very, very dear to my heart. And among other things, you are quoted in this article. The article references the fact that the Grey Panthers, an organization founded by Maggie Kuhn in 1970, is not quite as influential as it was, and that Sally Brown, the current director, blames the corporatized media, which has demonized social movements. And you said, I wish Maggie were here. Who is Maggie Kuhn?
Maggie Kuhn was a remarkable woman. She called herself the wrinkled radical. She had worked for many years in church-related YMCA work. She was forced into retirement at age 65, and she and a good friend of hers started this movement. And the subtitle of the Grey Panthers was Youth and Age in Action, or Age and Youth in Action. And Maggie always conceptualized aging as something we all are doing from the day we're born, and that everyone at all ages has a stake in children and also old people and everyone in between.
Well, and so Maggie founded the Grey Panthers and, among other things, managed to get the laws involving mandatory retirement changed, right?
She was very active in that, yes, and along with Claude Pepper, the late Congressman Pepper, who was another remarkable human being. She and others did move that forward. She also challenged, and I think the article, which I think was wonderful, but when, on terms of, it wasn't about Maggie Kuhn, but when you get to Maggie Kuhn, the thing that Maggie did so successfully was challenge attitudes about the old, both on a personal level, a cultural level, and on a very political level. So she was invited to the signing of the ADA, the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, and she tells this story. President Ford, who was president then, goes around and he turns to her and he says, "Young lady, how are you doing today?" And Maggie goes, "Mr. President, I'm not a young lady. I'm an old woman."
Well, that speaks to an important point as we talk about this topic of a silver revolution and whether or not we could see one. You know, it seems to me, and I was thinking of asking you this if we had time, but I'm going to bring it up earlier than I'd planned because that great quote from Maggie Kuhn so illustrates it, which is, it seemed to me for a long time as if the one politically acceptable form of discrimination that still lingers in our culture is age discrimination. That it seems that there's far less, that people can say things about older Americans jokingly or whatever in popular media, mass media, popular culture. There can be humor that they would never get away with saying about minorities or the disabled or religious minorities. Do you have that impression that we have a ways to go?
Absolutely. And Bill Maher, on his show the other day, a couple of weeks ago, did a despicable rant about the old and arguing that the old were cannibalizing the young. I think it's an attitude that's been put forward. I mean, the irony is that kind of attitude towards old is only attitudes towards ourselves because we're all old. But beyond that, it's this kind of stereotype has a political use. It's been used to undermine programs that affect older Americans. But the irony is, as you wrote very well in Huffington Post the other day, the attempts to destroy Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the attempts to roll back the Great Society and the New Deal, it's going to hurt our children far more than it's going to hurt today's old. Because what, in the name of trying to protect kids and sort of the crocodile tears for children, what they're really doing is cannibalizing our children's benefits. And in terms of the old, they like to use the stereotype, as you're correct, that old people are taking advantage of their young. They're busy jumping on trampolines in Sun City and spending their kids' inheritances, when in fact the larger issue among older people is certainly maintaining a decent standard of living, but they're also concerned with legacy. They're concerned with some very real human values in their families.
Well, and so to me, what that points to, and it's certainly been a major theme of your work, it was a theme of Maggie Kuhn's work, is the bond among generations, and the notion that, as you said, we're all old or will be someday, and I think there's a through line here that says, and then perhaps this is why you said I wish Maggie was here, but we need to embody her spirit, I guess. We've got a situation where Bill Maher can do a routine like that. Alan Simpson. I'll tell you a quick story. Mm-hmm. Last time I was on the Young Turks, which is a very popular internet program, Cenk Uygur basically pitched to millennials and younger people, although Cenk himself is about 40, and I'm far and away the oldest person who appears on with any regularity on the Young Turks. And someone sent a tweet.
We're going to start the Old Turks pretty soon.
Yeah, we're getting there. But, that's my point, though, is somebody tweeted, Eskow, he's the old fart who appears on the Young Turks. And, they probably didn't mean any harm by it, but can you imagine if they'd used an ethnic slur instead?
Absolutely.
So I guess my point is, and I'm not as old as I'm going to be, God willing, so I guess my point is that doesn't it begin with this kind of, whether it's with poor people or dark-skinned people or sick people, doesn't it begin by dehumanizing the other when in fact they're really ourselves?
No, it's very much, that's absolutely correct. And, you mentioned Alan Simpson. Alan Simpson has made a career on TV and sound bites talking about greedy geezers, about old people with their veins popping out, showing up as lobbyists. He's despicable. You know, he's funny. To me, a guy like Alan Simpson is like the classroom bully that we all kind of tried to stay away from. Very funny guy, but you either stayed away from him or you allied yourself carefully. The guy is funny, but his comments are harmful to other people. Here's a multimillionaire, born a multimillionaire, pretending to be folksy and using the most despicable language about older people, pretending to care about children but voting against welfare benefits for low-income children. In 1996, he voted to eliminate the right to benefits for poor children. At the same time, he says, I'm here to protect the little people. But the littlest of the little people, he's not. And the little people is just a horrible term. So, yeah, I think you're onto something, Richard. I think the notion, the dehumanization that is used as a tool to undermine policy agendas, to undermine human beings, need to be attacked. I also put some blame, frankly, on the White House as well, that the White House has been at arm's length from older people. I thought our president coming in had a wonderful opportunity to develop a new understanding about old age and about the role of older people. Older people, of course, contribute to communities, and they have an obligation to do that. We have obligations to give to others throughout our lives and to be contributing where we can. Our president seemed to only think about the old as receiving benefits, not thinking of the benefit of the work they had done to earn these benefits. He does many good things, but he really has missed the boat in terms of reaching out and identifying the concerns of older people, and older people of all races, all income, and the like.
Well, so what do we, let's pivot. I think that's very true. I think that's very well said. So the Silver Revolution, how do we start it? What's the first step? Now I'll give you my personal bias, and I suspect it's one you may share. Saul Alinsky and others say you mobilize around issues a community can agree upon. And to me, one of those issues is Social Security. Another is Medicare. But how do we frame these not as issues where the young, the irony of the Social Security battle is it's always, the old people, it's presented as the old people are defending their benefits, but none of the projected Social Security cuts would affect people collecting it now. So they're actually fighting on behalf of younger generations because they know how important it is. So maybe my idea is wrong, but can we crystallize the Silver Revolution around an issue like that?
Well, and with one kind of caveat that I know you totally understand, you've written on it, which is the one cut that would affect older people today is the change CPI. And thanks to a lot of pushing by a lot of groups, that's out of the president's budget and it's off the agenda right now. But by and large, totally right. The cuts being proposed in Social Security are going to hurt people in their 50s who are heading towards horrible retirements if we don't expand Social Security protections. It's going to hurt people in their 40s. I think the mobilization part
and we've only got about 30 seconds, Eric. I'm sorry about that.
Two pieces to the mobilization. One is people's self-interest, absolutely. Two is the insult of talking to older people as if they talking about entitlements. Darn straight old people are entitled, as are disabled and others, because they've earned it, they've worked for it. But the negativity that comes from that is annoying to a lot of older people. The other thing is old people are not, as you said, just concerned about themselves. Allying and developing an agenda related cross-generations critical.
We'll have to leave it there, but that's a great summary. And with that, we've been speaking with Eric Kingston, co-director and co-founder of Social Security Works. We will be right back, continuing the Silver Revolution and the other revolutions here on the Zero Hour.
You're listening to We At Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Breast health awareness is critical for all women, particularly African Americans, because we have an increased risk of dying from breast cancer compared to women of other backgrounds. At U of M, I'm doing research here and with women in Ghana to look for an inherited link that makes African and African American women susceptible to a more aggressive type of cancer. Finding this link, I believe, will make new treatments possible. But right now, making sure that you are properly screened is our best protection.
With experts like Dr. Lisa Newman, the University of Michigan Health System is a leader in cancer care. When you call our free Cancer Answer line at 800-865-1125, an oncology nurse will answer any questions you might have about the prevention, screening, and treatment of breast cancer and other forms of cancer. All calls are confidential. Call 800-865-1125 or visit uofmhealth.org/cancer answer line.
We're working to help everyone enjoy longer, healthier lives.
That's the Michigan difference.
As a National Guard or Reserve member, you served your country. Now let VA serve you.
I wouldn't be here today as a successful woman without the help that I received.
Your VA honors your service by providing a wide range of veterans benefits. From home loans to job training, VA benefits can help with some of life's toughest challenges.
What's important about VA benefits is they don't just touch you as an individual. They can touch your parents, maybe your grandparents, your child.
Go to benefits.va.gov/Guard Reserve to learn more, including how to apply online using e-benefits.
I just finished a master's degree recently, and now I'm working on another degree as well. So the military made that all possible. My veterans benefits made that all possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them. VA is ready to help you.
Achieve your next mission. Learn about and apply for your VA benefits today.
Hey, I'm Anderson Cooper. As a parent, you want to make sure that your child knows how to deal with bullying when they see it happening. And chances are they want to help, but they don't really know how. Teach them that the best thing to do is calmly walk away, find a teacher or other adult, and speak up. And do your part. Be that adult they can talk to and trust will listen. Join me to help stop bullying. Go to stopbullying.gov to find out more.
The true definition of hero. And being a hero took a heroic effort.
Every day we bring to our fans the world of sports. We speak of heroes and heroism, but there are days when sports matter little and heroes matter more. These heroes don't hit walk-off homers or buzzer-beating threes. They simply made a plan for what to do when disaster strikes. You never know when you might need to be the hero, because you never know if today is the day before a natural disaster. Prepare, plan, be a hero. Visit ready.gov.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
We are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and in this segment, we are going to be exploring the massive, mysterious monolith that is Google. Yasha Levine is a roving reporter with Pando Daily, formerly editor of The Exile, co-founder of the Shame Project, and author of The Corruption of Malcolm Gladwell. Yasha, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
I got to tell you a quick story about Malcolm Gladwell, by the way. I wrote a review of Blink where I said I only read a couple paragraphs, but I think it's no good, and isn't that the point? And I got a very heated letter from someone representing his publisher about that. But I was just being flippant. I actually have just purchased The Corruption of Malcolm Gladwell, by the way, and I'm looking forward to reading it. But the topic of the day is Google. You've written a couple of great pieces on Google, and one of them you say that as alarming as Google's Street View was, that wiretapping scheme was just a tiny experimental program compared to Google's bread and butter, a massive surveillance operation that intercepts and analyzes terabytes of global internet traffic every day, and then uses that data to build and update complex psychological profiles of hundreds of millions of people. You've heard of it. It's called Gmail. So Google says, don't be evil. Are they really as bad as that?
Yeah, well, it's they wouldn't consider it bad. I mean, I think that's from the very beginning the goal of Sergey Brin and Larry Page was to create essentially an artificial machine that knows you better than you know yourself, and can predict things before you even know that you want them. So it would actually search. So it would search things for you before you even search, essentially. And so in order to do that, it has to know you very well. And in order to know you very well, it has to surveil you very well and get to, it has to know everything about you. And so surveillance is not like, is not an evil aspect of it. It's not something that came, later on as the company got bigger or more profitable. I mean, it's built into the DNA of the company from the very beginning. Yes.
Now let me ask a devil's advocate question, which I don't agree with, but I'll ask it anyway.
Go ahead.
So what's wrong with that? So they know everything about me. So when I wake up in the morning, they say it's Friday morning. Eskow, you'd really like to have a cup of Pete's coffee, and then go to the beach, and we'll have we can call Uber for you or whatever, and get your taxi down. So what? What do I care?
Well, you might want that, and you might actually desire that, and so you might voluntarily opt into that, which is fine. Everyone has a free choice to do whatever they want. But the bigger problem with this is that most people don't know that this is happening to them. No, they don't know that everything that they're doing online through Google, which is pretty much everything that you do these days. Whether or not you have an Android phone, whether or not you use Gmail, even if you email with a Gmail user and you don't have Gmail yourself, but you're emailing with someone who has Gmail. Your conversations, what you're saying, is being recorded and being profiled, and so you don't really have control over whether or not you can stop this or whether or not you approve of this of this collection of information, very personal information potentially. And another problem with this is, when you collect all this information on hundreds of millions of people around the world, and you create these really detailed, vast databases on just about everything they do during the day. And what they think about, what they, their fears, their sexual preferences, their political affiliations, their political activity, all sorts of things. It gets stored in some database. It's spread all around the world. And the question is, what happens to that data? Let's say we trust it. Let's say we implicitly trust Google, and let's just say that Google is a great company. It'll never do anything bad with our data. It cares about us. It cares about our privacy, and it would be really damaging for Google. Let's say if it were to sell this information to, let's say, an authoritarian regime. But we don't really know what will happen to Google 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. Corporations come and go, and as part of, and so let's say it goes bankrupt in 20 years, and some other company takes over its business. Well, Google's going to have this ridiculously detailed database on hundreds of millions of people, and that data is worth a lot of money. So it's an asset. It becomes an asset, and that asset can be sold for money. If let's say, or if Google goes bankrupt, let's say, its creditors can auction off that data to the highest bidder. So we don't know. We don't have control over that data, and we don't know what will happen to that data. And because Google is still a relatively young company, it's only been around for like a decade, a little more. And really, so we're just beginning to even grapple with the ramifications of what it means to give one company, one corporate entity, this basically control over our personal information and our personal histories. Really, and the more time you spend on Google, the more detailed it gets. And if you're, and if you're a kid who's just, became a teenager in 2000, let's say 4, when they launched their Gmail service, and you started using Gmail right from the very beginning. Well, and you're going to be using Gmail for the next 20, 30 years of your life. Well, they know pretty much everything about you, from the time that you were a kid. So,
it's interesting that you mentioned kids, because since we actually asked you to come on the program, there's been a news story about Google, which is that the email application they were offering to schools, which now correct me if I'm remembering this incorrectly, if you know, but they were offering this to schools and saying they weren't going to mine the data of the children's emails, but they have been. Are you familiar with that story?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Exactly. It actually goes back to a series of lawsuits that started out all across the country, in different states, that pertain to various aspects of the Gmail business, and they were combined into one lawsuit, and they've been seeking. I think it was about 6 different lawsuits, and one of those lawsuits was about the education app. So Gmail for the colleges and high schools and whatnot, so that's been moving through the courts, and just recently they were denied class action status. That lawsuit, they were seeking class action classification, and so they were just denied that. I think a few days ago. It's not yesterday. So exactly. So it says that, hey, we're not going to be serving you ads if you're using Gmail for educational purposes, like I think the University of Berkeley, the university that I attended, I think uses Gmail. And for instance, they said, oh, we're not going to serve you ads because this is an educational app and all. But unbeknownst to anyone, they were actually still mining the data for information. They were just not using it to display relevant advertising, which is what you would see if you were just a regular kind of commercial or user of Gmail.
But once you go, let's say you graduate, if they link your identity with your future identity, they can do it then. They have even more data about you. They know not only what you're doing now, but what you did back in college. So listen, we just had a segment earlier where we talked about Rand Paul going to UC Berkeley and giving a big speech, very compelling speech about the NSA and the national security state. But Rand Paul, who's saying a lot more about surveillance and civil liberties than virtually any other politician out there, although I think he's a nut economically, didn't say word one about Google. And what is to prevent, first of all, Google's knowledge from getting into government hands? And secondly, isn't that an awful lot of power? Isn't your point? This is an insane amount of power for any one organization to have, because knowledge is power.
Yeah, no, that's right. And the fact that, Rand Paul didn't mention Google and cares only about this NSA. It's in line with his worldview, obviously. And of course, he's not going to be talking about private power and corporate power, because he supports corporate power and private power, unlimited and unchecked. So, and speaking about the NSA and Google, well, the Google and the NSA are not as far apart. We make this distinction between public and private, and government and private or corporate. So as if there's this giant wall that cannot be breached. And when it is breached, when the NSA spies on Google or whatever, or breaches its data centers, it's like it's this huge outrage, and people freak out. But that wall is much more fuzzy, and it might not exist at all. If you start to look at Google's history, in particular Google, if you look at them, the research that created Google, that created the search algorithm from the very beginning in Stanford, was funded in part by DARPA, which is the sort of research and development fundraising arm of the DoD. So there, Google search was funded by military money, and then when they left Stanford in 1998 and set up Google as a private company, they were right away started providing the intelligence community and various arms of the U.S. military with technology to enhance surveillance. The first contract with the NSA that Google had went back to 2003, when they provided search capability to the agency, internal search capability. Then they partnered a few years later with the NGA, which is the sister agency to the NSA, which deals in geospatial surveillance, not signal surveillance, but geospatial surveillance, which is, satellite stuff. They partnered with the NGA to outfit them with Google Earth. Google Earth is actually what came from also a CIA-funded startup which Google purchased in 2004. In a press release, they're talking about how they work in concert with the CIA, with the NGA, with the intelligence community to develop Google Earth technology so that it can be used by the U.S. military and then its intelligence services. So
So they know what you read, they know what you think, they know what your politics are, they know what your sex life is, and they know where you are geospatially. That's an unnerving portrait, and I want to talk more about this. Yatra, if you can stick with us through the break, I want to talk more about this ecosystem of tech companies and government and private capital after this break. Can you stick with us?
I will try, unless Google disconnects me.
Okay, all right, okay. We will be right back after this. I'm Richard Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
100% success rate in modifying your home. Free consultation at 10%.
Does this sound familiar? If you're in need of assistance with your mortgage, be careful where you turn for help. Loan modification scammers will offer deals too good to be true. Learn the signs so your life won't be turned upside down. Know it, avoid it, report it. For more information or to report a scam, call 1-888-995-HOPE or visit HUD.gov/prevent-loan-scams.
As a National Guard or Reserve member, you served your country. Now let VA serve you.
I wouldn't be here today as a successful woman without the help that I received.
Your VA honors your service by providing a wide range of veterans benefits. From home loans to job training, VA benefits can help with some of life's toughest challenges.
What's important about VA benefits is they don't just touch you as an individual. They can touch your parents, maybe your grandparents, your child.
Go to benefits.va.gov/Guard Reserve to learn more, including how to apply online using e-benefits.
I just finished a master's degree recently, and now I'm working on another degree as well. So the military made that all possible. My veterans benefits made that all possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them. VA is ready to help you.
Achieve your next mission. Learn about and apply for your VA benefits today.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at WEAC Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the ARC. The ARC is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The ARC is also home to the ARC Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the ARC, so stop by and see them. The ARC, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the ARC's website, www.thearcdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The ARC, part of Southeast D.C. WEAC Radio is a very proud partner of the Start at Westminster, a harm reduction, prevention, and awareness initiative sponsored by the Westminster Presbyterian Church right here in D.C. START stands for Syringe, Treatment, Advocacy, Resources, Training. These are the core elements of the harm reduction philosophy at START. The goal of this program is to reduce transmissions of HIV, hepatitis, and other bloodborne infectious diseases by empowering those at risk of infection with the tools, resources, and referrals they need to take charge of their health. Over the past year, the Start at Westminster tested over 1,600 people, and they're averaging about 150 tests each month. And of course, with the proper funding, that number could go even higher. For more information on this terrific program, go to www.startatwestminster.org or visit the Westminster Presbyterian Church, 400 I Street Southwest, right here in Washington, D.C.
And we are back on the Zero Hour. We've been talking with and are continuing to talk with Yasha Levine, who is a roving reporter for Pando Daily and has been doing great work writing about Google and the Silicon Valley complex of corporate technocrats and digitalcrats. And Yasha, are you still with us, or have they cut you off?
No. I'm here. Thank God.
Okay. Listen, let me paint a little mental picture. You tell me if it's right or not. Okay, so I've been saying this about the Silicon Valley and especially companies like Google for a long time. You were saying before the break that their basic search algorithms were developed at government expense through DARPA. For that matter, the internet itself was developed at government expense. So to me, a Silicon Valley quote-unquote entrepreneur is one who makes his money because of things developed by the government, given to him for free by the government, through tax breaks provided by the government, has customers who can only use his products because they were educated by the government, and then bitches about paying taxes.
Well, yeah, or they don't pay taxes, exactly, and no, it's ridiculous. Yeah, the hypocrisy, or just it's not even hypocrisy. I don't think. It's like because I'm not even sure that they're
blatant.
A hypocrite in a way. Maybe understands that they're a hypocrite. I mean, I don't think they see the problem really.
Well, that's a great point. I actually want to stick with that because I agree. I've encountered these people a lot. I've written about them in the Buddhist world and everywhere else, and I genuinely think that they've drunk a kind of Kool-Aid that says that they are part of a mystical secret brotherhood, and it's basically all guys, mostly guys, brotherhood of people who really understand how the universe works, and that they really live in a libertarian universe where their natural abilities have propelled them to great wealth. And I don't think they get these critiques, do they? You talk to Ro Khanna, who is their candidate for Congress. He is one of them. Whatever that means. He's part of their culture. Did you get the sense, talking to Ro Khanna, who appears to be challenging the incumbent Democrat from policy point of view, just to make them pay even less in taxes? But did you get the sense, talking to Khanna, that he really is an evangelist for this kind of empty space that is their set of political beliefs?
Yeah, he is very much so. And his ideology, what he believes in, it's kind of hard to pin down. I don't think he's anti-government, but he is. Again, it's essentially allowing the government, making a government work for private enterprise, making the government work for businesses, and it's because the businesses in the end are the engine of growth. Are the foundation on which prosperity is founded in America, right? And so I think they're not necessarily anti-government. A lot of Silicon Valley. I mean, I think there's a big range, right, in the Silicon Valley mindset. I think a lot of people who work for Silicon Valley companies, the rank and file programmers and coders and computer scientists and engineers, I think that they're much more kind of Democrat, maybe centrist, liberal Democrats, progressive. I think that's a huge part of who they are. I think the free market kind of extremism starts to show up only at the wealthier end of the Silicon Valley spectrum. So people who are venture capitalists and founders of these companies and people like that, because they really are convinced that of their own genius, and that they are, have gotten there by just their own efforts and by their own intellectual capacity. And
well, and what bothers me about this is I used to, I started out many years ago as a tech guy myself, and I mean, a lot of their products, just from a design point of view, are kind of crappy. Facebook is a stupid idea that was stolen and then executed terribly, and even with all its wealth and power, continues to be executed terribly. And they think, how do these guys convince themselves that they're geniuses?
Well, I mean, it's not hard to convince yourself when you're a genius, when you're worth billions of dollars, and everybody, falls, is just drools all over you. The press drools all over you. The politicians drool all over you. I mean, it's not hard. It's. I think it's pretty self-reinforcing. I don't know. I'm not one of these guys, but I don't think it's. I think it comes naturally, and I think you have to be particularly sensitive and insightful and kind of self-aware. To not fall into that trap, as one of these entrepreneurs. And honest,
we only got a minute or two left, unfortunately. But I mean, I'm not, I don't want to use epithets and things like that. But at the higher end of the spectrum, I mean, I think, when you start talking about government serving corporations, there's a name for that, and it starts to turn into, it feels like a kind of hipster techno-fascism in the making. I mean, am I being unfair?
I think that's right. I mean, I think it's I don't think that's unfair. And look, a lot of these guys, politically, they're kind of undeveloped and a bit amateurish and just kind of pathetic. Because from a political perspective, they don't have a politics. You know what I mean? They have a politics that is that's juvenile. And so when they see this guy like Rouhani, basically kind of being a Democrat, kind of being like an Obama-type figure, but even more pro-business and speaks their language. You can talk about disruption and disrupting government and bringing tech to government, and then talking also about the fact that, hey, we need to rework the tax code so that you guys can repatriate your profits from overseas without being taxed. And that inspires, almost... They see him as a sort of Jesus, which is pretty funny. I mean, because it is a very Republican. He's a moderate Republican, and he inspires awe in these guys, which is
well,
funny.
That's hilarious to me. First, and unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for now. But anyone who thinks government needs tech thinking hasn't tried to change their privacy settings in Facebook, but. Yasha Levine, Pando Daily, thanks so much for being with us. This is great. Keep up the great work, and I hope you'll come back. I'm Richard Eskow, RJ Eskow, and you've been listening to another episode of The Zero Hour here on We Act Radio. Come back next week, more talk about the future, the present, and what we need to do to get that revolution going, whatever the hell it's supposed to look like. I'm Richard Eskow. We will be back next week, and this is The Zero Hour.
Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.